Toyota's available in 6 different models. So trade up to a Toyota Land Cruiser.
Since 1951, the Toyota Land Cruiser has built a reputation as a reliable and rugged go-anywhere vehicle. It has morphed into a near luxury sport utility and along the way has sold over 10 million versions worldwide through hundreds or thousands of variants. This is a far too brief history of the Land Cruiser. So welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and the Land Cruiser is pretty fascinating. As an American, I know of Land Cruisers as competing with Land Rovers and being super reliable. Of course, the reboot of the FJ Cruiser in 2006. And in fact, this video started as a history of the FJ Cruiser, but as I looked at the history of Land Cruiser, I realized the wide variety of models that we simply don't know about here in the US. It leads to a fascinating history. But it turns out this story is more complex than I knew. And the Land Cruiser is still with us in ways I didn't really expect. Now, during World War II, the Japanese Army had been using what was called the Type 95 four-wheel drive reconnaissance car since 1936. But in 1941, they found a Willys Jeep in the Philippines, and the government was so impressed they ordered Toyota to make a similar vehicle, but specified to alter its appearance. The result was a prototype known as the Model AK. Later in 1941, the government requested a light truck, so in 1942, the half-ton AK-10 was reversed engineered from a Bantam GP with a 2.3-liter four-cylinder Type C engine from a Toyota sedan with a 2-speed transfer gearbox. By 1950, during the Korean War, the U.S. ordered 100 vehicles with a revised Jeep specification to be manufactured by Toyota, and this resulting Jeep BJ was larger than the U.S. Jeep and more powerful with a Type B 3.4-liter overhead valve 6-cylinder making 84 horsepower, had the chassis of Toyota's 1-ton Type SB truck, the suspension from a Toyopet passenger car, and a part-time four-wheel drive but no low-range gearing. And it quickly proved itself in the war and at home in Japan and became the official vehicle of the National Police Agency. In fact, the Jeep BJ was tested on a route only previously possible on horseback, a samurai's climb to the Shinto temple at the top of Mount Otago, as well as driving up a trail to the 6th station on Mount Fiji. This actually impressed the police agency to give up on their Mitsubishis and start using Toyotas. The early years were two-order only, but in 1953, the vehicle went in regular production, and in 1954, the term Land Rover was first applied. Until then, it was known as the Toyota Jeep BJ, where the B actually referenced the engine designation and the J meant Jeep. So, yeah, the name actually meant Toyota Jeep B-engined Jeep. Well, if you've ever wondered about the similarity between the British Land Rover and the Toyota Land Cruiser, the technical director at the time, Hanji Umehara, was quoted as saying they wanted a name that was no less dignified than their competitors. Later in 1954, Pakistan received the first export shipment of Land Cruisers, and Saudi Arabia the following year. They also gave the BJ a more powerful Type F engine, 3.9 liters with 123 horsepower. Hence my understanding that's where the FJ comes from with an FJ Cruiser. Engine, and once again, chassis model designation. In 1955, the second generation was introduced, called the 20 Series, intended to have more appeal to the civilian and export markets. It now had a shorter wheelbase version and a new long wheelbase version, as well as new and more powerful 125 horsepower version of the F engine, but still had no low-range gearing. In 1957, they introduced the four-door wagon version. In 1958, they began being produced in Brazil, becoming the first Toyota built outside of Japan. Interestingly, this F-Series engine was used by Toyota until 1992, making it the longest-running Toyota power plant. One advertising slogan said, quote, "We'll know how long it lasts when the first one wears out." Also interestingly, in 1962, they started using a Mercedes diesel engine in Brazil, and the car became known as the Bandeirante, but made in very low numbers. This will come up again. Also interestingly, in 1957, of all the vehicles from all the brands exported from Japan, over 38% were Land Cruisers. So in 1960, the now legendary 40 series was introduced and designated the J40. It offered 3 different wheelbases, both gas and diesel engines, depending on the year and the market, of course. The J40 series ended in most markets in 1986 and was replaced by the J70, but the Bandeirante version continued until 2001 in Brazil. Initially released with a new 125 horsepower version of the F engine, this model finally got low-range gearing with a 3-speed transmission. During this model's run, they passed 50,000 in global sales in 1965, 100,000 in 68, 200,000 in 72, 800,000 in 79, and in 1980 sold their 1 millionth version. By 1967, the Land Cruiser lineup had begun to split into essentially 3 versions. First, the J50 was released. Based on the 40 series, but with a longer 106-inch wheelbase and a fully boxed frame, it was a station wagon body and intended mostly for North America and Australia. The FJ55 sold until 1980 when the J60 was released. When the J60 continued to move to be more plush or luxurious, at least compared to more bare-boned off-roaders, once again a 4-door wagon, it was still rugged and capable, but began offering luxuries such as air conditioning, a rear heater, and upgraded interiors. The 2F engine introduced in the J50 continued, and they added a 4.0-liter 2H 6-cylinder and a 4-cylinder 3.4-liter 3B diesel. Engine revisions continued through the years until the model ended in 1990, except in Venezuela, where it continued until 92. The J70 introduced in 1984, replacing the J40 after a 25-year run. Now, this model continued the split in the Land Cruiser lineup and was itself split between the leaf-sprung cargo workhorse and a more comfortable coil-sprung people mover version that was equally capable off-road, arguably. In essence, this was a heavy-duty and a light-duty version of the same car. Once again offered in 3 wheelbases, short, medium, and long, and used around the world for many services such as pickup, military, and troop carrier versions. Variations of this 70 series are still sold in some markets around the world, and the wheelbase options rose to 5. Importantly, that medium light-duty variation of the J70 were produced and sold under different names, but one stuck, the Prado. While based on the more rugged, off-road capable chassis, this was marketed more towards on-road use, and in 1990, a second generation was introduced, running through 1996, with its replacement being the J90. In 2002, the 3rd generation was released as the J120, and the 4th generation in 2009 as the J150. Each generation got various engine updates and especially continued revisions to the suspension for durability and ride comfort, often shared with the 4Runner model. But in the US, we didn't get all of these different Land Cruisers, except we kind of did. We just know them as the Lexus GX series. With the 3rd generation Prado, the US got the GX 470, and in 2009 with the 4th generation we got the GX 460. Yes, this luxury Lexus has its root in the off-road ready ruggedness of those first Land Cruisers. The J80 was launched in 1990, replacing the 60 series. Remember, that's the more comfort model line, and in 1996 was developed for the US market as the Lexus LX. It was lightly restyled, more luxurious, and with a softer suspension, and it had a 4.5-liter inline-6, making 215 horsepower. The 4th generation was unveiled in October 2021 and is based on the current J300 series Land Cruiser, just like before. The J80 was replaced in 1998 with the 100 series and eventually offered a V8 engine. The J200 replaced the 100 in 2007, the J300 in 2021. It's still body on frame, but set out to reduce weight, lower the center of gravity, and once again has no V8 offering, but now a twin-turbo V6 making 409 horsepower, and a 3.3-liter twin-turbo V6 diesel being offered in some markets. This model marks the end of Land Cruiser being sold in America, with only Lexus versions being available, and leaving the Sequoia as their top-of-the-line SUV. So let's roll back to 2006 and that FJ Cruiser we started with. Since the cancellation of the FJ40 in 1984, Land Cruisers had been increasing in size and luxury. By the 1990s, there was a move within Toyota, and a specialty shop at the NUMMI plant in California was set up to test the feasibility of combining Toyota Tacoma underpinnings with the body of the current Bandeirante in Brazil, which was unfortunately canceled in 2001. The board approved, and the design studio was brought in to deliver a fresh take on it. Initially, the project was known as the Rugged Youth Utility, and Toyota really wanted to go after attracting that young male buyer back into the brand. Multiple concepts were created until a retro-styled vehicle was chosen, and the FJ Cruiser concept debuted in 2003, and it was a hit. In 2004, Toyota began off-road testing of the platforms, including on the Rubicon. Launched as a 2007 model, it had legitimate off-road cred with 9.6 inches of ground clearance, a 34-degree approach, a 30-degree departure, and a 27.4 breakover angle, and with 8 inches of front and 9 inches of rear suspension travel. It was based on a version of the same 120 series Prado platform with a 4.0-liter V6 that originally made 239 horsepower and was updated in 2010. After initial strong sales, it was removed from the US market in 2014, although it continued to sell until 2020 in other markets. In conclusion, there are many variations of engine suspension options and variations of body styles offered around the world that I simply could not try to cover in this video. It's fascinating to see the Land Cruiser evolve from a humble, crude, and rugged early days version that built a reputation around the world. As that old saying goes, if you want to get into the outback, you take a Land Rover, but if you want to come back, you take a Land Cruiser. Today, when we have even more basic versions or capable but plush, to me, they've lost their identity. They've become heavy, ponderous, plodding, gas-guzzling beasts for as long as I can remember. Yes, they still have and earned a reputation for off-road ability and rugged reliability, but for day-to-day use, they're expensive and often just inefficient. I deeply respect the Land Cruiser, but much like the plush vehicles from Land Rover, there's a desire for a more simple, smaller, off-roadable Land Cruiser like Land Rover did with the Defender. But is anyone at Toyota listening? Specifically, I think the FJ Cruiser wasn't a runaway and long-lived success for Toyota for multiple reasons. It was mid-size, larger than the RAV4, but only 2 doors. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do retro styling, and the end result was something that was eminently capable, but as a sport utility vehicle, it just lacked a lot of that utility. I think there's a market out there for something smaller and basic and off-roadable, something to compete, well, with the Wrangler, just like the original BJ did. Let me know your thoughts below, guys. Thanks.